Let me do that. All right. Can you see my slideshow?
Yep, I'm able to see it.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking, or tonight we're going to be talking about managing HTTP requests with NgRx. That's the title, but really it'll be an overview of using NgRx as a reactive framework to handle the flow of data and functionality in our application. And we'll take this really small application with just a couple features, and we'll build it out as an example to teach some of these concepts like effects and reducers, and you've heard the term like view models, selectors, or maybe you haven't heard that term. And we'll go through that tonight. A little bit about me. I'm Wes Grimes. I'm a software engineer at Nrwl, NgRx core team member, Rollup.js core team member, a mentor with Angular Girls. I'm building an SJS add-ons library, and I love weather and meteorology, and so that's my pastime. You can find me on Twitter at Wes Grimes, and then my website is wesleygrimes.com. Someone took Wes Grimes. And then GitHub, it's just github.com/WesleyGrimes. So to start out, but Scar, if there's any questions that you think I should answer first, go ahead and just interrupt me. I'm not going to monitor the chat necessarily.
Yeah, sure. I will let you know.
Okay. So what is NgRx? Well, NgRx is a framework for building reactive applications in Angular. It's not just state management per se, but a lot of people kind of recognize it for that. And so you could say it's basically Redux for Angular powered by RxJS observables. But it's really a lot more than that. And we have this diagram that's kind of new to our website that kind of shows some of the state management lifecycle that's going on. I think you covered in a previous meetup an overview of NgRx, so I won't go too much into it. But tonight we're going to cover the concepts that you see here. Pretty much every area in this diagram we're going to cover. We're going to talk about actions and dispatching those actions and having them feed through the reducer to handle our state transitions. We'll talk about some effects to handle like side effect calls to make HTTP requests and how that might interact with an HTTP client to then update our state. And then we'll talk about selectors to provide a way to notify the user interface of those changes to state. And so this diagram can actually be found on our website, ngrx.io. And then if you click on docs, and on the left-hand side, there's a store link, and it's on the intro page. So let's build an app. We're going to build a simple application that requests data from an external API and places it into state. And we'll use the side effects from NgRx effects to accomplish it. We want to update the state when the data is being requested, so that we can show a loading indicator on our screen. And we want to update the state with any error messages that may be returned if it fails to request that data. And so what's the shape of our state? Well, we're going to deal with jokes tonight. And there's a free API that exists out there. It's the Chuck Norris joke API. I love to use it. It's really simple to teach with. And basically, you can make a REST call and get back a list of jokes. And you get an ID and you get a joke back. And so that interface for that really just looks like what you see here on the screen. You have joke with ID and a joke field. And then our overall state, the shape of our store, will have a jokes property, which will hold that list of jokes we request. We'll have an isLoading property, which will be a true or false to tell us, is it in the middle of fetching the data or has it finished? And then we'll have the error property to handle holding our error message if there is any. So I've had this conversation with many people in the past, and it's kind of a thing we push with the NgRx team, is this concept that our actions in NgRx should be synonymous with like events that are happening. Those might be client events and those might be server events. And you might have something, I don't have it on the slide, but you might have something in between that's called like an initiator or a bridge event that would get you from client to server. And so what's an example of a client event? Well, maybe a button click. So you're on the page, if we're using an example that we're doing tonight, you need a button to fetch the jokes. And so there's a fetch jokes button. So the action would be fetch jokes button clicked. And it might not have a payload, right? Another action from the server side of things could be, jokes successfully loaded. So the API responded with a server event saying, yeah, I'm giving you back what you requested. So that would be a success. Or it could be a failing event where the HTTP client, the request that was made maybe gave back a 400 error or 500 error. And so that would be, request failed event. And so really, if you're thinking about this, you think about it as events and less of, don't say do this, or, if you think about the example of like add to do or delete to do or update to do, you don't necessarily want to be so specific, because then you're tightly coupling your UI to your state machine. So the idea is I'm just going to notify my state machine of what my UI is requesting to do or has done, and then allow my state machine NgRx store to react to that however it sees fit. And the power in that is that you can key multiple actions off of that. So you might want to do 4 different things with one UI event in your state machine. And so you can easily do that. Actions are reusable. I mean, not reusable. They can be consumed in multiple reducers and multiple effects. And so you get a lot more flexibility that way. And so we keep talking about these effects. What are side effects? Well, we need to build an effect that basically listens for a data request or this UI event that comes through that says, hey, I need this data, these jokes, and then makes a call to the HTTP service to request that data. It kind of bridges the gap. And then we need an effect that maybe listens for an error action that's dispatched or a failure action. And when that happens, we could show a pop-up window on the error message. We're going to use RxJS for that, so you should be familiar with that. And we're going to use operators like switch map, merge map, concat map, and show how they're different, because they do behave quite differently. Some other uses for effects that I've seen out in the wild, you can use it for routing. If you want to route when a certain action is dispatched, you can do that right from your effect, because effects can be injected with services just like any other service. You could show modals, you could save things in local storage if you want to with a tap operator. I mean, there's just a lot of flexibility, and all of that kind of lives on its own in aside, like the word side effect, right? So none of this logic has to live inside your components. And so your components become really more presentational, or just responsible for handling those client events, and then maybe displaying some kind of a data from the store. So that was just an overview. Let's go ahead and hop over now to VS Code, and I'm going to share my desktop now so we can see everything. Can everybody see that? See VS Code?
Yes, Wes.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead now. So basically, what we've got here is just a Angular 8 application that exists today. I have already in place, I have an app component. And in that app component, I have Chuck Norris jokes header. And then I had this app joke card list, like child component. That basically takes in an input of our jokes. It takes in a loading indicator and an error, and then renders using just HTML and just regular Angular renders a button area so that we can say load all jokes or load nerdy jokes. It has a progress bar that displays if loading is true. We're using Angular material here. And then it has a jokes list that actually does an ng4 over our jokes array and renders a joke card item component for each joke that it gets back. That component really just has a map card with a title and content, and it has an input of that joke object. If you remember going back to the slides, the joke object has an ID and a joke property. That's it. And if we look at our app component, .ts, the top level, this could kind of be the smart component, if you will. It's got 3 observable properties. It's got a jokes observable, which is our, observable of our list of jokes. Right now it's hard coded to just use of because it's not hooked up to the store. We have our error, which is the same thing. It's just hard coded to an empty, and then the loading is hard coded to false. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build this app out together and hook it up to NgRx. There is already a service out here that I created that'll handle requesting our jokes. So this is calling that API that I talked about, the api.icndb.com. And again, I'll make all this code available. I'll post a link. It's up on a repo on GitHub. So we have a get jokes and a get jokes by category. These are just 2 different methods that return our joke array as an observable. And so the service is already built out just for the time of the meetup, to meet the hour-long time limit. And then the other part that we have going on here is we do have a state folder, but I don't really have much in here. We're going to fill it out. And so what we have in our app module is we have, you probably learned about this last meetup, we have our store module and our effects module for root. And then we have the dev tools turned on so that we can see these actions as they're being dispatched and see the transitions to state. And then I have this joke state module. For this, I decided to go ahead and wrap up our state for our particular feature of joke into its own module. It's really how you want to structure it. If you already have a joke feature that's like lazy loaded, you might want to just have a state folder underneath your joke lazy loaded module that you pull from. But for me, I just did it in a module. And so what's already wired up here is we already have our reducer wired up, and we already have an empty effects module wired up and ready to go, right? And so if we go ahead and run this app, just using ngserve, and Zoom loves to suck up every last bit of my CPU, so hopefully it won't be too slow. Seems to be doing okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and open our website. Perfect, and let me open up DevTools to the right. And if you're using NgRx, I highly recommend that you install the Redux DevTools. It's free, it's in the Chrome extension store. What this allows you to do is that as long as you had that dev store module loaded here in your app module, you can actually see the actions being dispatched in real time. And you can even rewind, and your app will go back to the progress of where it was before. And so right now, like I have Chuck Norris jokes, I have a load all button and a load nerdy, and then I have these cards, and there's one there, and that's from my hard-coded data. So that as you see, when I click these buttons, nothing's happening, and then this is just the hard-coded joke. If I were to come back over to my component and maybe, sorry, my top-level component, maybe turn loading to true, just hard-coded, you can see it's going to show that progress bar instead of the joke list, right? And maybe I want to show an error. Oops. Yeah, and see how I have an error. And so the idea is we're going to wire this all up to the NgRx store so that it's real data, it's not just mocked up. So how do we do that? Well, let's start by creating some actions. All right. So let's put this back to false. So when we talked about those actions, they're as events, we have client events and server events. And so really we need an action that handles the ng on init. And so what we can do here is we could inject our store. So private store, and this is the NgRx store. We'll import. Let me go ahead and stop my app from running. See if I can get my IntelliSense to work. Yeah, here we go. So we imported store, and we want to do this.store.dispatch to go ahead and notify the store that an event occurred. Well, to do that, we need an action, right? And so typically you would have your joke actions or joke UI actions dot, and you would grab your action. Well, we don't have one, so we need to create one. So let's hop over to our actions file. I have these kind of segmented into API actions and UI actions. So our UI actions will be what come from the component, and then the API actions will be what come back from the response from the HTTP calls. So with NgRx version 8, it's gotten a lot more straightforward, a lot less boilerplate, if you will, is required to generate an action. So what we do now is we just export a const, and let's call this app component initialized. Initial, did I spell that right? Yeah. So you notice very specific about what my action is. I'm not calling it load jokes. I'm calling it app component initialized. And then the first part of that, the action creator that we're going to use is the type. And so this is going to be structured as this. It's going to be the source and then the event. And this is just a good pattern to follow, because that right there is what will actually display over here in our dev tools as we see in dispatch. So this is going to be app component init, if you want to call it that. Actually, app component and then initialized. If I could spell. Okay. There is an optional second parameter to this create action where we might need to provide payload with it. In this case, there is no payload to provide. So we have our action here. Now let's come back over here and let's see if we can trace back. So we need to export out of our barrel from our state joke folder. Let's export our UI actions. And now we can import those. App component initialized. And that's an action creator, which means it's kind of a factory function. So we need to actually call it. And then that will, when the dispatch occurs, that will actually create an action. What is an action? An action is really just an object. Like if we were to look at this, it would really be something with like type, app component, whatever that type was, the source and event. From a basic standpoint, that's what an action is this object. And so these creators give us a predictable way to build those. So now if I run my app, we should be able to see this action get dispatched when the component is initialized. All right. So come back over and refresh our page. Look at there. So now we have on the right-hand side these are built-in NgRx actions that are always dispatched. But this fourth one is our action now. So we can see it happen in the store. There's nothing going on. We're not changing any state with it yet. Our state is still just an empty jokes array, false and error. But now we have our action. Let's go ahead and create an action for the load all requested. So, it's going to look like joke UI actions, and it'll be like load all requested. Right. And let's go ahead and hop over and create that. Again, it's just export const, create action. It's still our app component, but it's the load all. And this is kind of just up to you and your company or your, whatever project and team you're working with and how you come up with this convention. But just keep it something that's traceable so you know where this action came from so that it's unique. So, load all, and then, or it could still be app component, to be honest with you, it'd be okay. Load all requested. And again, we don't have a payload with this one. So we'll do that. And then the last one is we had this on load category requested. So we'll say load category requested. The difference here is we're actually passing a category through, and so we need to have that as a payload. So to do that, it would look something like this, category. And then when we create our action, we'll define that as a prop. So we'll just copy this one. So then we have load category requested. And then the second parameter becomes this thing called props that we'll just import. And it's a generic, and so we'll give it of type category string. And then you call it as a method. So now what that allows me to do is pass category as a payload. And I'm just using like shorthand objects. So, that's the same thing as saying category colon category. So now if we come back over here, I can actually click load all and see my load all action dispatched. I can click load nerdy and see my load category requested with the category nerdy passed through to it. And you might be asking, how is it getting from the button to these? Well, it's just a matter of parent-child component communication. I just have this load all requested event that's being emitted up. Same with load category. So that down here in this list, when the buttons are actually clicked, they're just emitting those events up. So that's great. You're saying, Wes, that's fine. You're showing me how these actions are being dispatched, but nothing's happening. How does that happen? Well, to do that, we need to go ahead and hop over to our effect area. And so we need an effect. We're going to create 3 effects. We'll start with the first one, but we need an effect to handle listening for those initiator events or client events and saying, oh, these came through. That means it's my cue to go ahead and make a call to the joke service and then do something. And effects can either, they take an action stream observables in and then map to another action, or they can not map to any action, and you can basically do it like a dispatch false. And that would be a scenario where maybe you just want to show a modal or something. With the load all, we're actually going to map. We're going to map a couple actions here. We're going to map the app component initialized and the load all requested. But in both of those scenarios, we want to make a call to the get jokes service. And then when that is successful, map that to another action that we have yet to create. So how do you define effects? Well, it's an effects class, it's an injectable, and we've injected our joke service because we need that. And then there's this thing called actions service. And what this is it's a singleton, basically a behavior subject of actions that are flowing through the NgRx store. And so when a dispatch happens, eventually it's going to end up through the stream as an emit through this observable. And so to subscribe and map to that, what we do is we call this method called create effect. And you'll notice as I'm typing that, there's some snippets. So if you have the John Papa VS Code Angular snippets extension installed, myself and Tim, the Schreiber of NgRx, we added a bunch of new NgRx snippets, so they're there. So pretty much anything you can think of, NgRx, you can create actions. I should have used them in my example, but you can create effects, reducers, all that. And so we're going to do a create API effect. And it went ahead and scaffolded it out for us. And so we'll just call this load jokes on app. We'll just say load jokes. That's good enough. And then we're going to take in our joke UI actions. Let's go ahead and import that. Selectors, joke UI action. All right. And so what's happening here is it's calling this create effect, which is making the subscription in a safe way to this action stream. And we're saying, if the action coming through is of type, so it's like a special filter operator, if you think about it like that. So if it's of type app component initialized, or it's of type load all requested, then we want to do what happens below it. And so this says operator. Well, we'll just use we'll use merge map in this example. So, and then our API source. So what this is saying is, now what do we want to do? Well, we want to call this .joke service .get jokes. Okay, perfect. And now you notice it has a pipe and then a map, and we're mapping to another action. And then if there's an error, we're mapping to a failure action. So we need to create 2 more actions. These are our API or server actions. So I'm going to hop over to the API actions area, and we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'll use our snippet for this. We'll call this load all succeeded. Notice I'm trying to make these actions like events that are past tense, that they happened. And our source is our jokes API, right? And our event is the load all succeeded. And looks like there's a question. Yes, I will link the extension for the snippets, absolutely. It's actually the Angular Essentials plugin pack. If you install that, if you just search Angular extensions, it's part of that. It comes with it. Okay, so we have our load all succeeded. Well, we need to be able to provide to it, the payload, this data or jokes to that we get. So let's call this payload property jokes. And it's going to be a joke array, right? Okay. So now we should be able to come back and export our API actions from our barrel. These barrels are helpful, but be careful if you're doing barrels like this, where you have the folder with the index.ts, where you're importing and re-exporting with namespaces. You can get yourself into some trouble with like circular dependencies if you're not careful. So use those with caution. So what we're doing is, again, we're saying if app component initialized or load all requested, let's merge map the joke service get jokes and yeah, that's right, Brad, thank you. The get jokes to a joke API actions. And then this is our action we just created. Load all succeeded, right? Perfect. So we still got an error. That's because we need to have a failure action. So let's go ahead and do that. So that would just be export const load all failed, create action. It's coming from our jokes API, load all failed. And we need to be able to pass props to it as well so that we can get the error, right? So let's do that. All right, now I'll come back over here and say joke API, load all failed. All right, let's see what I'm missing here. I think I need to import map. Yep. And catch error. And I always miss something. That looks correct. I'll type. Is it there?
So Wes, there is a question like if do we have any extension path for WebStorm IDE?
You know, that's a good question. I don't for the snippets, I don't know of it off the top of my head. All right. If anybody else sees what I'm missing here, feel free. Type is declared here. Let's see. Load all failed. Import of. Thank you. Good call, Santosh. Perfect. There it is. Okay. So now that effect is there, right? So if we come back over and we say load all, our jokes should update, right? But no, nothing's happening. There's one kind of final, well, two more steps involved. And I know I'm going a little fast, but I want to make sure we get through this one pass, and then we'll go back and I'll talk through everything again. But as you notice, the cool thing is when I click, let me refresh this. So we have our app initialized, right? You see that? And then we got, all of a sudden we got a joke API load all succeeded. So our effect is working. It's mapping this action, component initialized. It's mapping that to this call here, which is succeeding, and then in turn mapping to the succeeded call. And if we look in the action, we could actually see the jokes right here. See them in our payload. So pretty cool. Chuck Norris does not need to know about class factory pattern. He can instantiate interfaces. So there you go. So now the next part is, okay, that's great, but we're not putting that into the store, right? So the next part is we need to create our reducer, because a reducer is how we actually perform transitions to state. So let's go and hop over to our reducer. I've already got our interface defined, we've got our initial state, and then with NgRx version 8, we have this create reducer function that kind of is an alternative to the switch statement you might be used to. And what you do is you pass it initial state, and then you can pass it a series of on handlers. So we're going to say on, and let's go ahead and handle our joke API actions dot load all succeeded. And then what you pass it is state, which is the current state, and then an action payload, which would be our jokes. here. And we're going to return a new state. And so what we're going to return is we're going to spread the existing state, and then we're going to update jokes. So remember, in a reducer, you should not be mutating state. You should be making a copy of what's there and returning a new version with the data that you want changed, modified, but in a copy, right? So that's what's going on here. And look, I've already got a circular dependency that we talked about. So I can tell you right now, that's because I'm importing from the barrel, and this is what happens. You have to be careful with this. I should have imported, since I'm inside the joke state folder, I shouldn't be using the barrel inside. So we'll just say, give me my API actions there. Cool. So now we're handling the succeeded. So let's take a look and see. So cool. So now if we look at our state, we notice that our jokes are now there from what was loaded from that succeeded call. So if you click action, that was the action dispatch with our jokes. And now state is not just an empty jokes array. We're going to come back more and add some more reducer handlers, but for now, you can see how that works. So then the last part in that cycle is, how do we then update our UI, right, to have that list of jokes? Well, if we come back to our app component, we have this observable right here, right, this jokes observable, and we're setting equal to hard-coded. We want to pull that out of the store. And so we actually want to say this.store.select, and then we want to pass that select a method, or almost like a lambda method to say, all right, for every value emitted through the store. So the store is an observable. This select returns an observable of the store. We want to pick off a piece of that store or derive a piece of that state from it. You could just write state.jokes right here and type this as any. Right, that would work. But it doesn't, right? And this is why it's not good to do it directly here. It's actually, this is the global state, and there's a joke property, so we need to say .joke. And we do that, and then boom, look at that. All our jokes are there. I can hit load all, and it refreshes them. And so this is the beauty of it. It's an observable. The store gets updated, our page is going to get updated by default. It's pushing data down. It's, we're not pulling it. But we don't really want to do this here because, first of all, you might need to do this in more than one place in your app. So you would have like duplicate logic. You maybe don't want to have this fire every time jokes changes if the jokes in the store didn't change. Maybe the state changed, right? Like some other property and it changed, but the jokes themselves didn't change. Well, you might want to create a selector for that. And a selector, it's really just a pure function with some safeguards around it that you pass to this select method. So let's hop back over to our state. And I've actually predefined some here that you can see. And what you do is you start off, and these are composable selectors, right? And so the top one is saying, I want to get the overall joke state. I don't want to get the part where we say state.joke. And so to do that, I have a selector called getJokeState. And then I call this built-in NgRx method called createFeatureSelector. And I give it the slice that I want. And because I defined in my reducer that the name of the slice was joke, like this, then that's how it knew what top level property to give it. So now I can say, all right, I want to go grab that feature to look at. Because remember, with NgRx state or story, you can have any number of features split across that top level root state. So I just want to work with joke. All right, now that I'm working with joke, I want to compose something that says, give me just a list of jokes back from that. And so what you can begin to do is stack these and build them together. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a selector called select joke list. And I set it equal to this create selector method. And then the first series of parameters are other selectors. And so I can say, hey, I want to start out with already selecting this get joke state so that I don't have to say state.joke.jokes, right? This is a functional way of doing things. And then once I get that, I can work with the individual state. And this last kind of parameter to create selectors, what's called the projector function. This is the part where we grab that derived state and then we use it and return a specific property or object based on that. And so we're doing the same thing for error. We're saying, let's start out with the joke state, and then let's just get the error property. I could get is loading as well. So in this case, these are pretty simple, but you might want to you might have a really complex state. You might want to combine multiple feature slices together and maybe do like a array.map or reduce or something. The cool thing with these selectors is you're working with the state in a synchronous way. So you're not having to do all this fancy RxJS operator magic to pull and do combine latest or fork join or whatever, or distinct until changed. You don't care about that. You let NgRx handle that part. You're just concerned with, all right, give it to me in this current synchronous form and shape it and map it to an output that I would like to see. And so in this instance, and I'll show you how we can do that in a minute, but in this instance, we're going to use this get joke list or select joke list, right? So I can come back over here, and instead of me manually selecting it, I still use the select method, but instead I can do this. Yeah, what's up, Alexander? Yeah, that's a great question. So I tell you what, let me get to that at the end. And we will explain why. I know this is a lot of ceremony, but you'll see why this is a really good option, especially if you're working with enterprises with large sets of teams, doing lots of features. You want them to do it in a uniform way with a pattern, and you want to remove as many foot guns as possible. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a great question. I get it all the time. And just remember, like I not tooting my own horn here, but I work with, I'm a consultant. I work with massive organizations using NgRx today in production. And there's been so many horror stories of orgs just trying to do the RxJS way and then running into spaghetti code issues, maintainability issues. And I'm not talking about small apps, I'm talking about large ones. You might have a small application where NgRx maybe doesn't make sense. This is more for the the larger enterprise type solutions. So let's see what's going on here. We got to get our selectors. I'm exporting them. So let's just see. Okay, so there we go. So now instead of doing it directly, we can just say this.store.select joke list. Yeah, that's good, Shyam. It's definitely a separation concern. You could probably achieve that with RxJS and a service as well. But NgRx really pushes you to think reactively and to decouple this. A lot more so than maybe a service would, because you might mix in a lot of business logic in the service and UI interaction that you may not do if you use the let me dispatch an action and forget about it kind of thing. So, all right, so because our type is inferred, we actually don't need that type anymore. So I'm going to take that out. It knows that it's a joke observable. I save it, I go back, everything's working still, and now we're using the selector. All right, let's do the same thing. Let's go ahead while we're here and just wire up our error. So we'll say select joke error, and we'll say select joke is loading. Perfect. So now you notice the only thing that's injected in this component is store. We're not injecting multiple services or anything like that. We have one kind of injection point. This really makes testing a lot more straightforward, especially with the testing mocks that we provide with NgRx. And maybe in a future meetup, I can talk about how to test NgRx. But this really brings a pleasant experience to testing with components because you're no longer having to mock multiple services up and deal with all that. All right, like you're literally saying, hey, did this action get dispatched on a init? That's all I care about. You know, does this select, or does this property, when given an observable of joke list, render my component as I expect? That's it. You know, and you let the store, and you test the store in isolation on how it handles the requesting of the data and all that. So you notice I'm clicking load all, and we're not seeing our loading bar. And if I were to come over here and kind of break our joke service, you know, maybe put a semicolon in front of the URL. We don't really see the error. Like there, yeah, there's a console log going on. And the other thing, sorry, I'm jumping around, Alexander, I'm thinking about too, is you don't get the dev tools if you use RxJS services. Like you don't get this really nice way to say, oh, it failed and my action was this. That's a huge benefit, is the ability to debug. And I can actually like rewind this thing over time and go back over time and play it. So yeah, but so you notice we're not showing the error message in the loading. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to come back to our reducer and we need to wire up those actions. Okay, so those actions would be what? The load all succeeded and load all failed. And we're already handling the load all succeeded, but we need to handle the failed and we need to handle those requesting actions so that we can turn on the loading indicator. So if we come to our reducer, let's kind of put these in order of how they happen. So on joke UI actions, app component initialized, or you can do this, joke UI actions dot load all requested. What I want to do, I don't care about the payload, there is no payload. I want to return state, state, with is loading set to true. And because I'm re-requesting the data, I want to go ahead and like set the error back to empty in case I'm making a request again. Now you notice my VS Code auto imported that and gave me a circular dependency. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix that. All right, so now we should see our loading indicator perfect. But what's the problem? It's the data's failed the request, but it's still loading. So we have to handle that, turning the loading indicator back off. So we already have our succeeded action. Let's go ahead and turn it off in there. So we'll set it back to false. And let's go ahead and set the error. Well, it's already been reset to empty. I'm going to copy this and do our failed action. So load all failed. This time it's an error coming through. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set the error property, and then we're going to set our loading back to default. So it's done loading, but it failed, right? So now, boom, we can see the loading indicator stopped displaying, and we have an error. Oh, we get an object. Well, that's because I'm passing, in my effect, I'm passing the entire error, but really I just want error.message here. So then if I change that, then we get the full message, right? 404 not found. So let's go back and fix our service. So you saw we got the loading indicator and then the joke's displayed. And we can slow this down if we want, just to see it a little better. Yeah. Pretty cool. So nothing happening on the load nerdy yet because we haven't wired that up. But let's come back over here. So what you notice here is we're able to be very explicit about the actions being dispatched. So team A might work on at your organization. They might be responsible for these components, right? And they don't know anything about the back end or even the middleware or the orchestration layer. They just know about like building nice components that fit what they should. So that can be segmented, and another team could handle the state machine, totally separate environment, isolation, everything. And they could just say, hey, tell me all your actions you're dispatching, and I'll build out the store to react to those as you need. And then here's some selectors for you to use to show your data. So it actually makes a really nice delineation line if you're thinking about how to structure, building these larger apps. There's other ways to accomplish that, but this I found it actually works in the real world pretty well. So again, this component really doesn't know a whole lot about the implementation details of it. So later down the road, we could totally change what we're doing, but these components could stay the same because they're just saying this thing initialized, this thing was requested, this category was requested. All right. So now let's say we want to do something else kind of cool in effects. Let's say we want to show an alert. I won't really go into pulling in, for time's sake, the modal or snack bar. I'll just do like an old school like window.alert, but I can show you. So let's say we'll do another create effect, and we'll say show alert on failure, and this will be of type joke API actions load all failed. And we're going to say when that happens, we're going to do a tap operator. We don't really want to manipulate the observable stream. We just want to do something. And then what's coming through here is the action itself. And so we can destructure that and get the error out. We could just say action here, right? And then we could say window.alert. I know you shouldn't do this, like use window directly, but for this example, you could say window.alert action.error. And then just to clean it up, let's destructure the error property out. Right. Second problem here though is we want to do, we're going to create an endless loop because you're supposed to map to new actions or turn off dispatch. And so if we're not mapping to new actions, we would actually be sending the same action through our effect, so it would get caught in a cycle. So what we're going to do is just pass an optional second object and say dispatch false. This is a true side effect that has no effect on the store or our state. And we're just saying, if there's an error, let's show a window alert. You could tie this into some other service or a notification service or however you want to. You could log to make a server-side logging call, whatever you want to do here. And then what we want to do, let's make our app fail again. And then let's go take a look. Boom, look at that. So we got a 404 not found. So it showed our alert when it happened. Pretty cool, huh? And again, that was only in response to this. You could also, in these areas, you could do routing. if you wanted to. Lots of options. The next part that I just want to show really quick is our load category. So it's going to be almost identical to load jokes. So this is really load all jokes. And this will be load category jokes. And this will be get jokes by category, right? And then we want to get the action coming through here. And we got nothing, right? Well, that's because we're listening to, it's using type inference. We're listening to the wrong incoming action. We actually we don't want to run this thing when the component's initialized. We only want to run it when the UI notifies us that load category was requested. So then I can use my action.category, right? And then the next part is we want to go ahead and create some distinct actions here, because we might want to put this in a different area in the store. We might be using NgRx entity, and then we want to do an update mini or insert mini instead of replacing everything that's there. And so let's go create a couple more actions, and we'll actually copy these. We'll call it load category. Yep, perfect. And let's switch this over to use those. Okay. And let's fix our service. Okay. We'll refresh. So we still get, what time do we end? Is it 8 o'clock?
Yeah, we have till 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to wrap up shortly, and then we'll have time for discussion.
Sure.
Okay. So so now everything's working. It did our load all, but I can now click load nerdy and notice that it hooked that up to my load category succeeded. What's the part I forgot? Well, we need to go to the reducer, right, to handle those. So let's go to our reducer. And again, what this is doing is this is forcing you to really think about how you structure your app and how those state transitions happen in siloed, kind of atomical ways that are predictable and testable. Instead of trying to do it all in one big, function or one big area, you're really kind of saying, this is the handling the actions that are dispatched. This is the effects to request it. And then my reducer handles actually updating the store. It's very similar to the Redux pattern. So I'm going to copy the load all succeeded and failed, because these are very similar. I mean, in reality, I could just do, yeah, let's just do that. Because the transitions are identical to state, let's just add here, we'll say joke API actions dot load category succeeded. And then here, failed. So basically we want to do the same transition to state, whether, it doesn't matter which one of these actions happened. So now our load all gets these that aren't really nerdy jokes. Chuck Norris has 2 speeds, walk and kill. And then load nerdy. No one has ever pair programmed with Chuck Norris and lived to tell about it. And so that got our nerdy jokes and updated our UI properly. And again, we could have in the past, maybe we would have structured this in a way where we had one action that's like load request, and one action that's load failed, and one that's load succeeded. But then it would have been really hard to know where these actions came from or what was going on. Now it's very clear. You can come to this reducer and say, oh, I'm doing this when my app component is initialized and when my load all is requested. So you know very, very clearly what, where, when, and why is going on. And then our effects have siloed that. And again, maybe you want to have a scenario where somebody in a file upload is another good example of this. I'm doing a talk next week on it, where I want to allow like multiple files to be uploaded at the same time. Well, merge map will do that, right? I could sit here and look at my network, and I could hit load nerdy like 5 times, and you notice it captured all 5 times and ran them kind of simultaneously. If I were to change this to concat map, it's going to run them one at a time in order that they were dispatched. So you notice, I can slow it down so we really see it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. And so it queued them up, but it's only running them one at a time, right? And then they all ran, which is pretty cool. If I turn it back to merge map, still in the slow 3G. 1, 2, 3, 4. You notice it now, it ran them all kind of almost simultaneously. So that's the power. If you're using RxJS with the effects like this, you can change the behavior just by changing the operator. All right, so I'm going to flip back over to the app. We pretty much have implemented everything in the application. The last thing I wanted to show is this concept of a view model, what I call a view model selector. This becomes really powerful when you have a lot of data in the store that you need to access, and maybe you have things like you want to show a certain icon based on the value of something in state. Maybe you want the title of your page to be something based on some computed values in state. You could come in here and have one big, select, and you could pipe and then map inside your component to get these different values calculated for your form or your component. But then you miss out on things like the memoization that you get with selectors. Built into these, when you call create selector, it memoizes it. So if the input doesn't change, then it's not going to refire it. And if the input changes but the output doesn't change, it's not going to create a new reference, which is really important for change detection cycles in Angular. We also do distinct until changed on our selectors. And so you might want to start thinking about this concept of a view model selector where I have one subscription in my component to one, observable selector, and then I use it inside my component, like the properties of it. So let's create one that has jokes, error, and is loading all together. So we'll create a new selector, and we'll say, we can call this app component view model. And we want to start with 3. We're going to pull in our select joke list, our select joke error. Remember, these are composable. And our select joke is loading. And then our fourth parameter is the projector. And so it's going to take each of those. So it'll have jokes, error, and loading. And then we can return an object that has all 3 of those together, like this. So if you look at it, our output is now this. Now, this kind of, you're saying, well, this doesn't make sense, Wes. You could just do store.select and get the whole state object. But think about, pretend this is a huge model, and we want to do something different. Maybe we want to append to the error here something just for the display, so we could do something like some prefix here, or you may have some elaborate mapping scheme. And then what we want to do now is we'll come back over to our app component, and we'll just say, we can just say our app, oops, view model is this.store.select. Why is it not? There it is. Perfect. So now we have this, which is those three properties. So now I can come over here and I can do an ngIf VM, just like that. And then here I can just say vm.jokes, vm.loading, vm.error. Oh, as pipe async. What am I doing? Sorry. Been a long day. All right. Let's see. I probably typed something wrong. Maybe I need to refresh it. Turn off our slow. Perfect. So, because, okay, that view model error example was not a great one, because if there's no text there, we don't want to do that. It shows it if there's a value there. So now we get the same result, right? Everything works, but we just have the one observable subscription. This is important if you have a huge, form, and maybe you have 50 properties on that form you got to display, 50 fields. You don't want to do a subscription or pipe async for every single one of those, because more than likely, if any of those fields change, they're probably all going to be changing to some extent. And so highly recommend this concept. Build your view model in a synchronous way in the selector based on data from the store, and then just use that for your modal. And you could even create right next to your component a selector file if you wanted to even get to that level, because it's really only used by the app component. So, all right, well, I'm gonna stop this, and I'll post a link to this, but I'm gonna stop sharing and kind of open the floor up to questions and discussion. And thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Wes, and thanks for giving us an overview about NgRx and going through all these code snippets to us. I think there is a question from Alexander.
Mm-hmm. My concern is I work as an engineering company that's rapidly growing. Yeah. Currently still trying to point out the benefits of RxJS over promises. Yeah, no, I get it. And again, this is one of those things where you want to set patterns up to follow that are time tested and are kind of maintainable. And with NgRx, it's almost like with RxJS, you kind of don't really have guardrails. You kind of just give them this huge pipe, right, with lots of power coming through it, and then everybody gets in this habit of doing a dot pipe and manipulating that observable stream. And then you may run into issues with like memory leaks and weird behavior. And that's just that is a learning curve, but so is NgRx. And so with NgRx, it's like you set up these patterns ahead of time, and you say, this is how we're gonna do things, and you follow them. And then the debugging, I think, with the dev tools is like one of the biggest benefits there is, to be able to see your data and your state change over time as actions are dispatched. That's huge. Trying to debug RxJS is just not fun. and it's in some cases it's not even possible in some scenarios. So
will you be sharing the GitHub link for this particular sample, Wes?
yeah, I will do that. Let me go ahead and push it up while we're talking here, because I was working in the repo. So what was Alexander's second question?
So Alexander is having a question like what are some resources or guides that help to set these patterns for beginners, but also has a good examples for applications at a large scale?
Yeah, couple things. I wrote an article. Let me post a link to it. It's version 7 of NgRx, so it doesn't have all the new syntax yet. It's getting there, but I wrote an article called NgRx Best Practice for Enterprise Organizations.
Satosh already shared it in the chat.
Okay, yeah, there you go. That's it. So that's a good one to talk about structure. And I'm actually working on like round 2 of that. That'll update it to version 8. Another thing is, like, I work at Nrwl, and we have an example application that's really good to follow that shows a structure. It does use NX, you know, the NX CLI mono repo concept, but it's kind of a well-structured actions as events NgRx app for you to take a look at. And we are working to improve you know, documentation more on our website, but there is good docs on ngrx.io to take a look at.
Yeah, Shyam has a question. Like, are there any recommended resources for NgRx test cases?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with going to our website and under docs, and then depending on the part you want to test, there's a testing, there is a testing page, which is a good start. But as far as resources go, I'll send you some articles. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I know like Tim DeStriver has a good one that talks about using the new mock selectors. And then we had John Croson that worked on the mock store piece. He has, or you know, was part of that. He's written some articles to show using that because he used, he's a Capital One and they use it heavily there. But I think that's a good topic that needs to be fleshed out further as far in the public realm. Is we're doing a lot of this great testing stuff, but we need to document it for other people to see better. And so I definitely would be willing to come back maybe to do a meetup on testing NgRx and the best practices for that.
Yep, sure.
So what do you mean by hybrid app, Alexander? Oh, it works beautifully. That's actually one of its best use cases. So you can actually install NgRx and make it available so that you can dispatch actions, for example, in AngularJS, and have the store in Angular listening to those actions. And so if you want to bridge data across, you can do that. But basically, this store is a singleton service that can be made available to both AngularJS and Angular. I mean, you lose the typing, you know, and all that in the JS world, but it definitely works. I've seen NgRx used as well as a way to communicate between like Angular elements. So if you're doing the upgrade process with Angular elements kind of mixed into your AngularJS app, you can use NgRx for those to communicate with each other. You know, another kind of similar discussion is like I've built mobile apps in Ionic, and I've used NgRx to power the client-side data, and it works beautifully with like WebSockets. And so if you have a mobile app that might have it subscribed to data from the server, like that's getting pushed to it, maybe it's a Facebook clone and you've got posts and comments, and you want to like consume that in your Ionic app, setting up an NgRx store to handle that's great, because you can create an effect that basically, you know, uses that RxJS operator of the from to convert a WebSocket event stream into an observable. And then it's just a matter of creating actions to handle that. So that's another really good use case for it. No more questions?
I have one question, Wes. So is NgRx, can we know, like, let's say if we have multiple components like component 1 and component 2, and is there a way we can identify that, okay, the actions are getting processed in a synchronous manner, like first in, first out?
So if you need to ensure that the actions, I would say if you have to ensure they're processed that way, you might want to rethink how your app is structured.
Okay.
Then it's less reactive. It's more imperative, where your components are telling it what to do, right?
Yeah.
And but you could ensure that with maybe effects that chain them together. So one effect would listen to an action and then map to the next action, so that you know. You could also, you know, pass along keys or, you know, timestamps in those props as well, and check that. I mean, those are some options, but I would say that, you know, I almost feel like that might be, I don't want to say anti-pattern, but it might be something you want to rethink if possible, to avoid that.
Okay. So there is an off-topic question, like, what is your opinion on Flutter over Ionic?
The thing I like, so Flutter requires you learning a new language, right? Dart, I think. Yeah. Ionic is already in TypeScript or JavaScript, and so, I mean, that's just one less language to learn, one less code base. There's a lot of mental overhead if you're managing apps, and you got one that's in Dart and one that's in JavaScript, maybe one that's in Python. It's like, try to minimize that. If there's not a real reason to use Flutter, I don't see the point. But maybe, you know, I've heard good things about it too, so don't want to talk bad about it.
Yeah. So there is a question from Majid, like how we can keep the store updated between many users. Like, for example, if a user updates something, others cannot see it if their store does not get refreshed.
You want to make sure that they do see the updates?
Yeah, let's say if there is something like a central API which updates something in the state, and that should be reflected to all the clients. So I think this is something Majid is asking.
So, I mean, NgRx is client side. I mean, it's not meant to manage backend data or middleware data. So it should be used in the context of, I'm logged in, you know, I'm in my local browser session. Yeah, exactly. It's for the browser instance you're on. If you needed to do that, you could have like WebSockets, like we're talking about on the server, that pushed events out to other clients. And because everybody's going to have their own instance of the NgRx store, right? So, because it's client side. Yeah, like Brad said, Firebase is another great example of this. And there's I mean, you have the Angular Firebase library, and I've integrated Firebase in with NgRx, and it works great too. So some people just like Firebase on its own, but yeah, that's another good example. You're welcome.
Yep. So do we have any other questions? So there is a question from Shyam, like, is there any performance issue if you have a big NgRx store?
That's kind of a loaded question. What do you mean by big? Oh, like caching a lot of data. So if you're caching a lot of data, if it's data that's in list form, then you want to use NgRx entity. I didn't really go into that tonight, but we've created really efficient ways to store large lists of data using like maps, like a dictionary and a map. And so pulling in and putting back in data, that's kind of optimized. But you really want to think about what it is you're caching, and do you really need to cache the whole thing, or is it just the view model fields, and you can make a server request when needed, like lazy load it. So it's a balance. I would say try to keep your store as flat structured as possible, not deeply nested, because that can slow things down and just become complicated with your selector knowledge or selector composition. But yeah. You're welcome.
Yep. So with that said, thank you, Wes, for giving us an overview today and going over all the code samples. So I will be publishing this recording into our YouTube channel of JavaScript and Friends, and I will also link all the resources which we discussed till now, the GitHub URL and the best practices articles, and the Angular Essentials extension by John Papa. So I'll put all those resources there. Thank you everyone for joining today. In our next meetup, we will be having in November, which is on November 11th, 2019 by Jesse Sanders. He will be giving an overview on E2E testing with Cypress and Angular. If you are subscribed to our mailing list, you'll be getting those updates when I publish the details in Eventbrite. So thank you everyone, and thank you for joining today. Thank you, Wes.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I had fun.
Yep, thank you.